So what is the future of driving? For a long time, cars have been very much the same, with so little changing. But we're heading towards a rather exciting future, where a whole new generation of transport awaits us. So let's take a look at the future of cars. So looking at the future of cars, well, across the next decade, we are going to witness a radical and overdue transformation of our transportation. As we experience a generational and technological shift, we have to get away from our current model, which is so inefficient, with 90% of our private transport doing absolutely nothing 90% of the time. We're already seeing the glimmers of moving towards a future where cities focus more on much more low-scale, localized transport, walking, cycling, hopefully electric scooters and such like, backed up by a dramatically improved public transportation system, followed by shared ownership of cars. Moving away from this idea that we all have our own car, which is what generates the incredible inefficiency in our current system. And instead we have less cars doing more. Shared cars, mainly through autonomous transport. And finally, still having private transportation where it's truly necessary. But all of that private transportation being some level of zero emission technology, be that hydrogen, electric car, or whatever else the future may bring. There's often an argument that the future is going to be EV, electric car, electric vehicle, or hydrogen, but it's going to be both. They're not enemies of each other. Both of them allow us to move on from the problems that we have with combustion cars. Now, the electric car is beautifully simple, with our battery connected to an electric motor and an internal conversion efficiency of roughly 90%. Part of the reason why I can drive around in an electric car covering 100 miles for slightly over £1. Now, a hydrogen car takes an electric car and complicates it. We still have the battery, bit of a smaller one, and we still have the electric motor. It's a fuel cell electric vehicle. And now we add in hydrogen tanks and the relevant conversion systems. Now, by complicating the electric car, the running costs triple or quadruple due to hydrogen being significantly more expensive than direct electricity. And sadly, the inefficiency goes down from the 90% of direct electricity to 60% in the hydrogen conversion process. But still, 60% is infinitely better than the current 30% efficiency conversion of a combustion car. With a combustion car, if you hand over £1 at the petrol station for your petrol or diesel, only 30 pence of your money goes towards the car actually moving, with 70 pence being spent on waste energy, heat, noise, and such like. So regardless, both hydrogen and electric cars get us away from that terrible level of inefficiency. So hydrogen or EV, well, each one has to be applied to its relevant use case. With electric cars being cheaper to run, cheaper to service, cheaper to maintain, you have to weigh up what do you really gain by switching over to hydrogen. For the vast majority of the population using their car to take the kids to school, nip to the shops, generally doing less than 50 miles a day, and occasionally longer journeys for holidays and such like. Well, with EVs, such as the one that I'm driving at the moment, doing pretty much now 300 miles off a charge, soon to be doing 400, even 500 miles off a charge across the next decade. That really meets the needs of the vast majority of the population, especially with the UK charging network expanding rapidly and about 60% of the population able to home charge. So where does that leave hydrogen? Well, hydrogen definitely has its use cases. It's going to be very useful for commercial use. That increased energy density, the ability to store more energy and to go further than a standard electric car, will be wonderful for our freight, rail, ship, airplanes, and in some case studies, yes, it will be relevant for some people for private use as well. The vast majority of us, a simple electric car makes more sense. One of the other advantages of an electric car is the ability to make your own energy. Electricity is thankfully very simple to make and also very cheap to make. I'm able to charge my EV for as little as 5 pence per kilowatt hour. That's roughly £1.25 for 100 miles. You cannot get that kind of pricing with hydrogen. Now in the near future, when I invest in a nice solar array and battery storage for my house, I will be able to make my own energy, something that I cannot do with a hydrogen car. I can't home charge a hydrogen car. I can't destination charge it at the local supermarket or the local swimming baths. I can't generate my own energy for it. And you have to weigh up, is it really worth gaining an extra couple of 100 miles of range to lose so many of the benefits of a straightforward electric car, especially going from 90% efficiency down to 60%? Feel free to add your comments on what you think about the future being hydrogen, electric, or both in the comments below. Now, people often grumble about the UK's charging network, and admittedly, it is patchy, but constantly improving. But then we talk about hydrogen like it's some solution to that. But if we look at the charging network, well, refuel network for hydrogen, it's even worse. By the time the hydrogen network gets established, and I do hope it does, the EV network is going to be dramatically improved. I mean, in Nottingham, where I'm driving around at the moment, we have over 400 public chargers and expanding all the time. But with 60% of the population able to access some form of home charging, you don't often need that public network as much as people tend to think we do. Obviously for those long journeys. When I go down to Cornwall, which is going to be about 300 miles, given that the range of this EV is probably about 200 miles into the journey, we'll take a break. A 1 hour break to recharge the humans, have a drink, have some lunch, get the dogs out and give them a bit of a stretch of the legs. And while we're refueling the humans, the car will be recharging as well. 1 hour out of a very long journey, back on the roads and down to Cornwall. Nowhere near as difficult as people often think it is. At the moment, the UK charging network has in excess of 18,000 chargers, currently expanding at a rate of over 500 new connectors added to the network every month. BP and Shell are now heavily invested in the expansion of the UK charging network. And charging speeds getting faster all the time. If we jump back 10 years, the fastest we had for EV charging was roughly about 50 kilowatts. At the moment, the UK now has some 150, even 350 kilowatt capable electric car chargers. Now, if you can sustain a charge rate of 250 kilowatts, you're talking about adding 1,000 miles to a battery in 1 hour. To that point, we're looking at 15-minute recharge times. But it does get faster than that, because starting in 2020, we are going to be seeing the very first 500 kilowatt hour capable chargers beginning to appear, which gives us a nice little glimpse into the future. We are talking about charging speeds of the near future so fast you will barely have time to get to the loo and grab a coffee. Now, I'm quite excited about the very rapid developments in autonomous cars, and we're going to see some significant changes across the next 10 years or so. I'm very conscious that my interest and excitement in the efficiency improvements that we get from autonomous cars is essentially talking myself out of a job. But I'm kind of accepting the fact that in the next 10 years, maybe 20 years or so, I'm going to gradually become redundant. The idea that in the future we will have less cars doing more, wonderful. And being able to open your phone and press a button and a car turns up to take you to your destination before then going on to see the next person. Less cars, doing more. Much greater levels of efficiency. Now, I do find it hard to believe that autonomous cars can possibly do any worse than human drivers, given that the stats show at the moment humans are responsible for over 3,000 fatalities a day across the world. I do find it hard to believe that autonomous cars could possibly do any worse than that. Autonomous cars don't get tired or fall asleep or drink too much before driving the car, and they have sensors and the ability to process data at a rate far beyond anything a human driver could possibly manage. Now maybe we'll see special autonomous driving roads where autonomous cars can just interact with each other, resulting in phenomenal reductions in our accident rates. But of course we are going to see autonomous cars interacting more and more with human drivers through the next decade. And like all of these things, there's going to be difficulties. I think it's completely fair to say it's going to be difficult and there are going to be problems. But it is complete nonsense to say it is impossible. The rewards at the end of the challenge are well worth pushing through and getting towards. There are so many stats and so much data, but one thing we can now confidently say in 2020 is that the lifetime emissions of an electric vehicle are significantly less than the lifetime emissions of a combustion car. And as the production emissions for electric cars continues to fall and the grid continues to get cleaner, that gap between combustion and electric is only going to get bigger. If we jump back to 2012, the early days of electric cars, it took roughly 8 years to offset the emissions of the production of an electric car battery. Now in 2020, that is down to 2 to 3 years, and it's a figure that will continue to fall. So at the moment, if we drive a standard combustion car and we look at their entire infrastructure, we're talking about 125 grams of CO2 per kilometre. But if we switch to an electric car and we base it on the UK national grid, that figure, including all of the infrastructure in the background, drops to 57 grams of CO2 per kilometre. And if we move to the future, as our grid continues to get cleaner and we move more and more towards zero emission technology, that figure will continue to drop and of course get much lower. At the moment, the production of the electric car battery generates a significant amount of emissions, but this is offset through the running of the car. The larger the battery, the longer it takes to offset. But based on the kind of battery that the majority of the population are going to have, we're looking at roughly about a 2-year offset at the moment, and improving as the years go by. Thank you for watching the video. Do hope you have learnt about and enjoyed our video about electric cars. It would be great if you could offer your own comments and thoughts on electric cars in the comment section below. And do watch the next video. If you have enjoyed this video, please do subscribe for more content and maybe give us a like. I'm Rob Cooling for Get Driving.